A shock defeat for the government overnight as Labour overturned two massive majorities at the Mid Bedfordshire and Tamworth by-elections. Joining me now is the pollster and director of JL Partners, Scarlett Maguire. Hi, Scarlett. I mean, is it all over for the Tories? Do they have any chance of coming back from this? I understand that if you took these swings, 20% style swings, and you extrapolated them into an election victory, it would mean a 190-seat majority for Labour at a general election. I can't imagine that will happen, but it's not great news for the Tories, is it?
Yeah, I think saying it's not great news for the Conservatives is a bit of an understatement. I think it's also, it's always a bit of a fool's game to write people off completely. Things might change. There's always a chance, I suppose, that they could come back from it. But no, these defeats last night were pretty devastating. And as you say, I mean, if this sort of swing was to be replicated on a uniform basis across the country, then yeah, we'd be looking at Labour with sort of more than 500 seats and the Conservatives with less than 30. Now, I don't think anyone is saying that's going to happen, but it doesn't sort of, I think it goes part of the way to illustrate just how bad a night this has been for the Conservatives.
But both these by-elections had very, very low turnouts. My interpretation is that these results, these votes, were not so much a vote for Labour as a vote against the Tories, that in these constituencies, at least, and probably around the country, there's a great lot of fatigue with 13 years of Tory rule. So what do you make of the fact that the turnout was so low? Is the real thing to extract from these results that actually people right now are pretty fed up with politics?
Yeah, so I guess, a sort of caveat, which is that by-elections are very funny things. They tend to get lower turnout than general elections, not always. There have actually been by-elections in the past with turnout of under 20%. So, here we're looking at just over 40 and just under 40. There does seem to be a lot of voter apathy at the moment. This is something I pick up in focus groups, and we do those all over the country. And actually, it is a really big problem for the Conservatives. If national voting intention polls are right, they're not even holding on to half of their vote for 2019. So it's a massive problem for them. But interestingly, the by-election in Scotland, which was mainly a sort of Labour SNP contest, also showed very low turnout. So I do think there's a general sense that people are not that confident that their vote will change a huge amount of what's going on in the country.
Absolutely. Now, in these focus groups you do, and as a pollster, what is it, given that we can deduce that people are pretty fed up with Sunak and his Tory government, what issues are the important issues that people have become fed up with the Tories about?
Yeah, so I think this is part of the problem for Rishi Sunak and his government now, which is that they did a good job of identifying what the public is upset about, or sort of stressed about, actually. So things like the economy not feeling as well off as they did a few years ago, or feeling even poorer. Immigration, there's a lot of concern about the immigration system and a feeling that it might not be working very well. And then the NHS. So Rishi Sunak's pledges at the beginning of the year correctly identified that these are sort of voters' priorities. The problem is what we've seen throughout the year is in an attempt to show, I think, that the government and that the Prime Minister understand voters' concerns, we've seen the sort of rhetoric dialed up saying, I'm going to address these, I understand how bad it is. But the problem is that's been happening at the same time as we've not really been seeing much delivery on the ground. Now, you could say this is because these things are very hard. These things are very hard to turn around. But that doesn't, register so much with voters. They're just saying that, well, not delivering on anything. So there's a sort of chasm between what they're saying they're going to do and what they're doing. And I think that is the biggest problem for them at the moment. Now, you might say Labour might not do any better. That may well be true. But I think voters have got into a point where they're prepared to roll the dice because they're just so desperate for a change.
Absolutely. Proving that time flies when you're not enjoying yourself. Incredibly, it is 1 year to the day since Liz Truss resigned as Prime Minister after her disastrous and brief tenure. How much damage do you think that Liz Truss's brief administration did to the Tory party?
Yeah, so I think there are a huge amount of what ifs, and we'll never quite know. But I think, some of the key statistics that you need to bear in mind, which is that the Conservatives and Boris Johnson left office were only sort of about 10 points behind in the polls. They had been a bit further behind, and they recovered a bit after Ukraine, but under Liz Truss, they went to over 30 points behind. So they completely bombed. Now Rishi Sunak has pulled this up. They're now about 20 points behind. That is still pretty catastrophic for them at the next election. But I do think we don't know how things might have been, say, had Rishi Sunak won the Conservative leadership contest. You don't know. I think we can probably say things would never have bottomed out quite as much as they did. But would he be ahead now? Would he be neck and neck? I mean, it's really quite hard to say.
Now, the thing about by-elections is, they're a great barometer of the public mood. But when people vote in by-elections, they don't have to think about, the next government. It's a very different kind of poll to a general election. So we know that in the past, ask Neil Kinnock, that when people get into the ballot box at the very last moment, a lot of them who probably would be saying, right, I'm going to vote Labour, I've had enough of the Tories. And at the last moment, they go, oh, wait a minute, Jeremy Corbyn, do I really trust Labour to be the government? Oh, no, I'll vote Tory after all. So what I'm really asking you, Scarlett, is on that basis, in your view, is it possible that the Tories could claw this back? Could they still win the next election?
I mean, things are always possible. I do think it is worth illustrating that, if these results last night, I mean, we've heard people say today that it could potentially be an even bigger landslide than Tony Blair got in the 97 election. So we are looking at a pretty bad circumstance from the Conservatives. But as you also correctly identified earlier, a huge amount of damage to them that's being done to them at the moment is their 2019 voters that are refusing to come out. So they're staying at home. We actually saw in Tamworth that they were going to reform slightly. So Reform kept their deposit in Tamworth, which they've not been doing in these recent by-elections. And actually, if all those voters that had voted Reform voted Conservative, they would have just about held onto the seat. So it would have been very, very tight. But so there is a sense that if you've got all those voters, hypothetically, that are going to Reform, that are currently don't know, that are also undecided, if you added all of those up together, then things would be looking a lot more competitive. I think the problem is at the moment for them is that there are no real signs of those voters coming back home. And actually, we know from when we didn't poll these constituencies, but when we polled Selby in the summer, we were sort of asking these don't know voters, what are the chances that you'll vote Conservative? And they were really, really low. So, I mean, there's an awful lot of work to be done if that is to be the case at the next election.
Yeah, awful lot. You accuse me of making the understatement of the century. I'd say an awful lot of work for the Tories to do is also an understatement. Great to talk to you, Scarlett. Fascinating. Thank you so much. Scarlett Maguire there, Director of JL Partners, the pollsters.